For this afternoon and tonight, a significant winter storm, including heavy snow with limited drinking.
Hello, and welcome to the SnowBrains podcast, where it's my job to interview the most intelligent people in the snow sports industry and pass their fascinating knowledge onto you, our listeners. I'm your host, Miles Clark. I'm a professional free skier, a mountain guide, an Alaska heli ski guide, a UC Berkeley molecular cell biology graduate, the founder and CEO of SnowBrains, and I just arrived in Alaska for my 17th ski trip here and my 4th season heli ski guiding here. We just had 4 succulent, recrystallized powder days right after I showed up, and then the storm rolled in. We just went through our 6th storm day, and when it clears, it just might be exactly what Alaska heli skiing dreams are made of. This episode of the SnowBrains podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Are you ready for an unforgettable ski getaway that takes care of everything? And I mean everything. Head to one of Club Med's mountain resorts where you can experience the thrill of the slopes without worrying about a thing. With their all-inclusive packages, you'll get all your lift tickets, ski passes, ski and snowboard lessons for all ages and ski levels, delicious meals, exciting apres-ski activities, and even childcare for the kids, all included in the price. So you can focus on what matters most, carving perfect turns and enjoying the breathtaking views. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to book your ski escape today. My guest today is Sandi Duncan, the editor of the Farmers Almanac. The Farmers Almanac releases a winter prediction every August that signals the looming start of the ski season in North America, and it gets skiers and riders beyond fired up. Their winter forecast is generally SnowBrains.com's most popular article of the year, every year. Hello, Sandi. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And when did you ski last?
It was about 2 years ago. I must admit, I'm not an avid skier. I always wanted to be, but I did go up to Hunter Mountain in New York. However, we didn't check the almanac, or maybe we did, but it was my birthday weekend and we went anyway. So it was very icy. And I might also admit that I never get off the bunny slope, whatever it's called. But I love snow and I wish I had started skiing years ago, but I haven't. I'll go again, but I'm not an avid skier, sorry to say.
Fortunately, you are in the majority. Something around 73% of skiers and riders are green circle beginners. So it's like the vast majority of you guys. We almost need you guys to make a club. You could outflex the rest of us.
That's right. That's right.
Get some real power. Well, Sandi, again, thank you for being here. I really want to dive into the Farmers Almanac and what you folks do to make your incredibly popular winter predictions. But I always like to start with people's life story because I think this is how we can really learn about who someone is, where they're coming from, and where they're going. So if you don't mind, we'd love to hear your quick and dirty life story and take as long or as short as you want. We're all ears.
Sure. Well, I like to say that my luck to work on the Farmers Almanac came from being born on a Friday the 13th, really, truly, honestly was, so.
Wow.
But it's interesting because I grew up in New Jersey. I did have goats. I had a horse. I always wanted a horse, but I didn't get a horse till I was a teenager. I had a pony for a long time. We had some rabbits. We had some chickens. And then my parents had a greenhouse business. And every spring I had to work at the greenhouse business. So much so that once I was an adult, I never wanted to go to a greenhouse again. Now I love them again. But anyway, I moved to Maine. I actually got the job at Geiger, who is the publisher of the Farmers Almanac and distributor of the Farmers Almanac. And they're a promotional products company up in Lewiston, Maine. I wrote the ad for managing editor for Farmers Almanac because Pete Geiger, who's the editor emeritus right now, he's also very involved with Geiger. So he said, I get hired as a communication writer for Geiger. He's like, can you write the ad for managing editor of Farmers Almanac? I said, sure. So I did because I was probably 22, 23, and I wrote the ad. He got all kinds of people applying for the job that were wanted to retire in Maine and everything else. And all of a sudden he said to someone, I want somebody like Sandi. And they're like, well, why don't you ask her? So the rest was history. So yeah, I got the job at Geiger. I have 2 children. They are grown. They live in the city now, even though I do still grow. I moved back to New Jersey probably about 20 years ago. I lived in Maine for a while. I was actually going to leave Farmers Almanac. I didn't want to, but I wanted to move back closer to family. And Pete said, "Hey, can you do it from New Jersey?" And I said, "Hey, sure." So I have been working from home for quite some time. So in a nutshell, that's my life story. And here I am. About a year and a half ago, I did get promoted to editor, which is very exciting because I am the first female editor of the Farmers Almanac in 100 and or 200 some odd years.
Congratulations. I'm happy to hear that. Well, I love that you wrote the ad for the position that you ended up taking. I love it because, it probably originates from your side of the coast, but we in California, we call and where I grew up in the Northern California, we call the city of San Francisco. I'm assuming the city is New York City for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like that, you're technically a farmer, so you
Yeah.
do gardening. Well, Sandy, to start, tell us what is the Farmer's Almanac and give us some history or organization, please.
Sure. So the Farmers Almanac started way back in 1818, actually in New Jersey. It started by a poet, astronomer, and a teacher who really loved to study the stars, and he came up with a way to predict the weather. And if you think about it, back in 1818 or 1800s even, there was no TV, there was no radio, there was no internet. So people really relied on publication. So pretty much at printers, you would have a Bible and you would have an almanac. So for quite some time, there were probably hundreds of farmers' almanacs because it was named after the people of the time. And these farmers' almanacs contained very valuable information for people of the time. They were farmers. They worked outside. They needed to know what time the sun was going to rise, what time the sun was going to set, what the weather was going to be, what was going on in the night sky. And a lot of them, too, we have quite the collection in Lewiston, Maine, of old copies of the Farmers Almanac. And it's really kind of fun sometimes to look at them because some of them are also filled with crazy ads, the cure-all medicines. You take this pill and you'll live to 150 or something.
Elixirs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, say that 5 times fast. But yeah, it started back in New Jersey and it actually started as a promotional product. So businesses would sponsor it and then give away as kind of a goodwill gift. Pharmacies would give it out, banks would give it out. And then in the 1950s, Ray Geiger took it over. And because his company was a promotional products company, he really expanded the promotional side of the Farmers Almanac. So still today we have a retail version, which you can find the copies at the stores or newsstands. And then we have this promotional version that a lot of some ski resorts give them out, restaurants give them out, banks give them out, all kinds of places. And it's a promotional product. So, the almanac has always been, it's a tradition, and that's what's kind of fun about working on something that started back in 1800s. It's a tradition. It offers advice. It offers astronomy. What recently has become more and more popular. We have times of when to go look for a meteor shower, when to look for the full moon, what the full moon name is, and why is it called the full pink moon in April. So it's really been a resource, not only for farmers, but for people who want to live, a more natural life. They want to garden. They want to find the best days to do certain things like go fishing. So it's really become a resource, I think. And it's also a little bit of nostalgia and tradition. And of course, a source for long range weather forecast and when it's going to snow. And of course, we have a website at farmersalmanac.com. So, we try to keep up with the times while also remaining true to our theme or our reason to be published to really help people live a good life.
That's fascinating. And I really like the history that, yeah, it's true. Farmers need to know, at what time is the sun going to rise and set
Yeah,
in March, when I need to do the
right.
planting and then obviously the opposite in the fall and when we need to harvest. The moon going to be doing, because traditionally the harvest moon was these big, little bit longer full moons that you get in the fall. And maybe you could work at night because of that full moon and continue the harvest because obviously the harvest was a huge amount of work back in the day. And then from our very esoteric perspective, I think you folks know that it's hugely popular with skiers and riders. Do you folks know that the snow sports community is infatuated with your winter forecast or your winter predictions?
Well, we're very happy that they are. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. But yeah, people want to know when it's going to snow. And it's really funny because when we have a winter forecast that's not so great, it's like, when they're not going to be so happy with us. But it's funny because we have the snow community, obviously, but it's true. People either love snow or they hate it. There's no in between. They love, love, love. They
hmm
can't wait for it every year. So yeah, we are excited. And yeah, we do our best to try to give people an idea how much snow might come so you can head out to the slopes or just build some snowman if you like.
And I'm one of the people that loves astronomy. I'm infatuated. The Farmer's Almanac's been around since 1818. What do you think has kept it relevant for over 2 centuries? It's impossible. I mean, SnowBrains is 12 years old, and that feels like a grind.
Well, I think first and foremost, what everybody thinks, of course, the long range weather forecast. For a
Mhm.
long time, we're the only ones that went out on a limb that give you up to more than a year's worth of weather in one place. But I think it also, as I mentioned, astronomy, we have these best days to go fishing. We have a best days calendar, which is very interesting.
Wow.
List best days to brew beer, best days to cut your hair, best days to potty train your toddler, best days to quit smoking. And that's based not only on, it's based on moon phases as well as where the moon is in the zodiac. So it's a little more astrological. However, people swear that if they follow our best days calendar, they get the best results possible. So I think in a way, the Farmers Almanac has always been a resource for information you can't find other places. And now farmersalmanac.com is as well. So it's something, it answers questions that you really never thought you had we're going to question anyway. Curiosities, why is there a big full moon today? And what is a super moon? And why is it called the full pink moon in April? And why is it called a harvest moon kind of thing? And we also have our gardening by the moon calendar, again, a tradition that's been with the Farmers Almanac for years and years and years. Because just like the tides, the earth is affected by the moon. How much water is in the soil, how much pull is happening from the moon phase. And people, again, that follow our gardening by the moon get the best results possible. So I think it's a little bit of tradition, a little bit of curiosity, and a little bit of like, oh, Farmer's Almanac, I got to get that every year. It's almost like it's a calendar, but it's not. It's a book, and it lasts for an entire year.
Well, you very much piqued my curiosity already with this because I really love to surf. I spend 2 or 3 months a year surfing anytime I'm not on snow. And obviously, the tide is super connected to the moon. But to think that the Earth is too, it's so obvious. The moon is so close, it's so big, it has so much gravity, it's pulling on the Earth so hard. Of course, it would have effects on other things that I haven't even thought about before. So I'm already intrigued to read more. And just really quick, what's the physicality of this book? You're still making an actual physical book that's the Farmer's Almanac. How much does that cost? And is that all available online, or is it better for people to get the book?
All right, so there is a physical copy of the almanac. Each edition comes out, each New Year's edition comes out in August. So, for example, the 2026 will come out in August of this year. It stays on bookshelves and at your grocery stores pretty much through mid-April. Can buy a copy there. You can always get a copy at farmersalmanac.com.
And how
As I
many pages approximately? Sorry.
It is exactly 184 pages.
Oh, that's
Uh,
hefty.
yeah, it sells for $8.99. And contrary to
Cheap.
popular, we have a few ads, but we really don't have that many ads. So it's quite a bargain because it's all year long. But we also have farmersalmanac.com. We offer a lot of information on there. In fact, you have this weather history feature app on our farmersalmanac.com, which you could go back and see if it really did snow on your birthday or if it really was a good snowstorm, or to check out what really happened this past winter. It's a weather history app. So you can get it both ways. You can't get all of the weather forecast on our website unless you become a member, but I highly recommend that. And if you become an all access member, you not only get access to all our weather and our gardening and our fishing and astronomy, but you also get a copy of the Almanac print edition for free.
Well, I love that you have some fishing specific ideologies in there too and suggestions. So you've been there for 30 years, more or less. And the modern world has changed at an insane rate, at an unrelenting rate in those 30 years. So how do you keep this publication that's in modern terms ancient, over 200 years old? How do you keep it modern? How do you keep it relevant? And how has it changed during your tenure?
When I look back, so the 1995 was actually my first edition, print edition of the Farmer's Almanac. We didn't have a website. There was
Mhm.
not, that wasn't even existing mostly for publications up back then. One of the first editions, I think the biggest thing that I've seen as far as the print edition itself is the design. Came a long way. When you look back at some of the copies from 1970s or whatever, there was just so much more copy and nobody likes that anymore. They want design. And we have a fantastic art director, Allison Vallon, who really embraces not only graphic design, but also just Farmer's Almanac living. And it's really come a long way, I feel, in that section. We now have 72 pages of full color that was never existing. But
Wow.
I think the big thing is, and it is a struggle sometimes, like how do we keep it current, yet how do we keep it still nostalgic? And as I mentioned, I think because we're a resource for things like weather lore. What does that double ring around the moon really mean? Does that mean it's going to snow? We'll give you the answer in the Farmer's Almanac at farmersalmanac.com. What is the best way to get sap off your hands when you go Christmas tree hunting? We have that
Ah.
answer for that. And sometimes you don't even think about asking that question, but all of a sudden you pick up the Farmer's Almanac and it tells you something like, what's the shortest season? which is a good question for you. Do you know what the shortest season is?
No, what is the shortest season? Fall.
Winter. Winter is
Winter.
actually the shortest of the four seasons, lasting only 88.99 days. And pretty much it's because the Earth is at its closest point in its orbit to the sun. So it's kind of fun. People, of course, you guys probably love winter and want to keep it going forever and
We
ever.
do.
But it is the shortest season, of course, getting into spring. But yeah, I think there's a charm. I think there's a need again for younger readers too to reconnect with nature. We've moved to the cities or we've moved away from things, but the past 5-10 years have proved to us that we need to know how to grow stuff. We need to know how to do things a little more naturally. All the craziness of food contamination, why not learn how to, even if you just grew it with some tomatoes on your balcony. So I think there's some, grandma used to tell you these things. Well, grandma used to read the Farmers Almanac, and so did your parents. So you should too, because there's some valuable information. So I think the way we've been able to remain relevant.
And it's very impressive. Skiers and riders also love the lore. So are there any more I mean, I know maybe some of it is proprietary and you'd like people to get the book to learn more, but I grew up with things like if the caterpillars look super hairy in the
Yep.
fall, that means a big winter. If you see the squirrels getting more nut, there's a few other things. Are there any other funny lore? I mean, you've been there so long, you probably know a few about what might
Oh,
mean a big or a light winter.
sure. Yeah. And we have tons of weather lore on farmersalmanac.com. We have a few in the book itself. So late summer, if you notice it's thicker than normal corn husks, that
Mm.
means it's going to be a harsh winter.
Mm.
Also, one of our favorite, and you really should keep track of this, in August. Supposedly, for every fog in August, there will be a snowfall following the following winter. So in
Ooh.
August, count how many times there's a fog and see if there's that many snowstorms in the next winter. So yeah, weather lore is just, it's fun, it's interesting. And really, if you think about it, it was made from observations because they lived closer, they lived in the land. And like you said, they wanted to know what time the sun was going to rise, but they also said, "Oh, look at the leaves that they're showing their backs. The storm is coming." Paid attention to that, where we don't pay attention to it as much anymore. And just like that game where you tell something over and over again, sometimes what was the original saying may have gotten translated or changed as it went down the road. So some of the lore we find isn't quite as accurate. It's more fun, but it's fun. It's fun to pay attention to it. It's fun to, especially if you have young kids too. I've always found like it's fun for them to get involved and pay attention to see, wow, we had 10 foggy mornings that we're going to have 10 snowstorms in the upcoming winter season.
No, I do like that too. The idea that the game of telephone is played and eventually the fog ends up being frost and it just keeps
Right,
changing and
right.
changing. I do like the idea that the earth is smarter than we are, that nature is smarter than we are, that they might have ways of predicting. And you even hear about how dogs will freak out before an earthquake and things like that too. So I think there's inherent human desire to believe that we're part of this system that is more intelligent than we will ever know. And so I think that the lore taps into that. And I might be stretching here a little bit, but that's the way I see
I
that
like it.
connection.
I like it.
But really what's so hot and sexy and exciting to skiers and riders is that winter prediction that you folks put out, I believe in the late summer or no, sorry, late fall.
You're right.
It's
Late
like late
summer.
summer. Okay, that's right.
August we release it. We always release it in August. Yep.
That's right. So and that's smart because people are just getting that transition into thinking about snow and getting excited for that. Maybe more excited than any other time, honestly. People always want what they can't have. It's just
Right.
another human trait. So it's highly anticipated. It's normally our number one most popular article of the year on snowbrains.com. So I'm so curious to know, or just to see, maybe you can walk us through how you folks develop this winter forecast or this winter prediction each year.
Sure. So yeah, the long range weather formula is kind of a proprietary secret, but I can tell you it is a formula. It is based on things like phases of the moon, where the moon is in the zodiac, as well as sunspot activity. There is some historical weather thrown in, and there's some proprietary factors that are looked at. So basically, the long range weather forecast was established back in 1818 by David Young, our founding editor. And yes, we've changed a little bit. We've tweaked it here and there, but he really was able to correlate different things in the sky with what the weather might bring. We have tried to take into consideration how much the earth is changing and how much the climate is changing, and we continue to fine tune that, but we really base our weather predictions on this proprietary astronomical mathematical formula.
I love that it's a secret. I think that's the key too, because again, I think it taps into that, the Earth and the universe and the solar system is more intelligent than we are. And so this idea of, okay, well, we can default to that intelligence, to that knowledge, to that deep understanding. I think that's key. You should always keep it a secret. This episode of the SnowBrains podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Calling all skiers and snowboarders, escape to the snowy peaks of Europe, Japan, China, or Canada with Club Med. There are more than 20 all-inclusive mountain resorts offer unparalleled convenience and endless adventures. Explore world-class ski resorts, indulge in authentic gourmet dining, and unwind with lively apres-ski activities. Let Club Med take care of everything so you can simply relax and enjoy your ski getaway. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to discover your ski paradise. But I am curious, it might not be a secret that you take in climate phenomena like La Nina or El Nino into account. And is that something you folks look at?
We do. The challenge is, so the 2026 weather forecast, which will be released in August of 25, were actually created over a year and a half ago.
No way.
Yeah,
Really?
because of timing and everything. So I've tried to then push it up a little bit. Now, I don't do the weather forecast. We have a weather prognosticator who goes by the name of Caleb Weatherby, not his true name, but he is
An alias. I love it.
Elliot. When we put together, like, for example, we're going to press with the 2026 Almanac in early June. So we're starting to put together the outlooks and so, in each almanac, we have 7 zones that we give the long range weather forecast by month. But then what we do is what you were talking about. We kind of give an overview of the winter. We do the spring, the summer, and the fall, but the winter is always what people get most excited about. So when we look at that, we try to, if we notice that there's a La Nina or the El Nino coming in or to play, or they're talking about it, we do try to factor that in. But sometimes it comes out a couple months after we printed. It's kind of a balance beam that we try to look at it, but sometimes we don't have any information that it's going to affect the winter until it's too late. We're already at press.
I mean, I almost wanted to ask our editor to put in a record scratch for that because I need you to repeat that. So you build this a year and a half ahead of time. Just say it again because it's hard to believe. So
yeah, so the weather forecast, the predictions are actually made almost a year and a half based on production schedules and how much time it takes. And then when we put them all together, we do consult NOAA, we consult other weather sources that we respect to see if they're saying that La Nina or El Nino is tending to form or what other things may come into play so that we can, perhaps we can't change the actual month by month predictions at that point, but we can give kind of an overview of what we think might happen based on our predictions as well as what may be happening in the atmosphere.
wow. So you do a year and a half ahead of time. Okay, that just it blows my mind a lot, but you do take into account some of these changes just before you publish, which makes a lot of sense, especially considering how relatively consistent La Nina and El Nino change the patterns. And what's the timeline for research? So if I was, I'm assuming you have a bit of a team, but if the leader of your team, how long does it take them to build one of these winter predictions?
So our weather prognosticator, he gives us the weather predictions a year and a half in advance. Then we work on it and we get it ready for press. We typeset it and everything and design it. But then he comes up with the winter weather forecast ahead. So I'm sure it takes him months, and then he gives it to us. And then with our internal team, we look at it, we try to come up with something fun like wet winter whirlwind, just on spot. So it takes a couple of months. I mean, I'm sure it takes even more for him to put it together, but for our team, then it takes probably a good 4 weeks to 6 weeks just to make sure that we feel confident with what we're releasing for the winter weather outlook.
And does it feel heavy to you? Because to us, it's a huge deal and we get huge traffic off it. People are infatuated and, obviously people start arguments and they're discussing and comparing it to other predictions. So when you release this, is this something your team really looks at carefully right before publishing? All right, do we dot all of our I's and cross all of our T's? Because we know this is going to start, as you just said again, a whirlwind.
Exactly. Oh yeah, we do. And it does feel like a lot because going out there on a limb and we're trying to give you a forecast that other people poo-poo or they say that you can't do it. However, it's very interesting to see that more and more people are trying to give long range forecasts. So it is kind of an interesting like copycat that now, Farmers Almanac's been doing it for 200 plus years. Maybe we should start doing it. But yeah, and we don't have the liberty, your local meteorologist who yesterday said it was going to snow, and then today he says, "Oh, sorry guys, we have to stick by our predictions." And that's tough, but I think that people give us a little bit more of a leeway with the Farmers Almanac because we do it so far in advance. We do it by zones. We do 3 days at a time. We do our best. We try to give people an idea of what may come, but we're not 100% accurate. I don't know anybody that's 100% accurate. And I think sometimes people give us a little bit more of a, oh, okay, you were wrong, versus your meteorologist who is out there. And we never said we could replace the meteorologists. They're very important, obviously. But yeah, it's a lot. And sometimes it's like we're on pins and needles waiting to see how well our forecast does for the winter.
Well, as you should be, and as I would too, like as most people would. It's a really bold step to take, but you've been doing it for 200 years, so maybe not as
Yeah,
bold for you
yeah.
folks. Even I'm totally infatuated with the Farmer's Almanac, but I see that every year and like, wow, that's bold. It's August. It's so far away. But like you said, there's a lot of copycats, including the National Weather Service of the United
Oh, yeah.
States of America. Their
Yep.
forecast comes out just after yours. I want to say that theirs comes out in early September, you're late August. So I do feel like they are copying you as well because they understand the popularity of that too. And that's not going to hurt them in any way, shape, or form. I am curious, and I'm guessing it's a challenging question. Do you folks compare what you've created to what the National Weather Service creates and sort of see what their differences are? Like, are there any, I'm not asking this question well, but basically, do you compare what you've built to what NOAA builds when they have their long range winter predictions?
I mean, obviously we look at that, obviously, but one of the things about the National Weather Service is they're like 50% chance of colder winter or 50% chance where we go out on that limb and say it. So obviously we look at it. And I must say, I have not yet really dove into what they said for last winter and what actually happened as well as ours. But we do. Obviously we look at it and it's interesting to compare to see what's going to happen. And like I said, we do our best and we try to give people what may come, and we love when we hit it right on, especially for you snow lovers. When the snow is falling, it's always good for us too.
We literally freak out about anything snow related, especially forecasts. And the longer range the forecast is, and if it correlates to some kind of accuracy, the value of that is not calculable. And I really do like the idea of how bold your forecast is because, as you say, all meteorologists reserve the right to redact. They can
Right.
be like, hey, I said it was going to snow yesterday. Today it's not snowing. And here's why. Or maybe even they do it like the day before. Hey, now I don't think it is going to snow. Things have changed. The models have changed. So you folks don't do that. You stick to your guns all the way through. I think there's something beautiful about that as well.
And we
And it's
do
in
bow down
print.
to Mother nature. We do say, and we've said
Oh
it before
yeah.
in some of our reviews, she's in charge. So she likes to
Oh
throw
yeah.
the ball, and she doesn't. I did see a quote and I thought it was great. It was something about how Mother Nature doesn't make the best business partner. And she really doesn't because she does what she wants to do.
Well, you tell me. You'd think that even as a snow sports publication, we would have some sort of insulation from the weather, and we really don't. On a
Mm.
bad snow year, we get less traffic. On a great
Yeah.
snow year, we get tons of traffic. It's a looking back, it's like, what was I thinking? Why would I have a weather dependent business? That is not the smartest plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So my next question is, when does your forecast come out? You said the end of August. And I like that you're aware of how into it skiers and snowboarders are in North America. And I'm curious about farmers because do farmers rely on these Farmers Almanac weather predictions? Because, my family grew almonds and walnuts in the Central Valley of California for 24 years. So I spent a lot of time on a farm. You try not to be home during harvest season,
Right.
really like, oh, I happen to be gone in September. Sorry. And my stepdad at the time, who was the farmer, he always used the Farmer's Almanac. He had a subscription, and he was all into it and he would read it at night with his reading glasses. So I'm just curious, what's your experience with actual farmers using the Farmer's Almanac?
Well, it's really interesting because obviously, as we talked about before, when the almanac came out, and that's why there were other farmers' almanacs out there. It's kind of like there was a daily news, or there still is a lot of newspapers used to be called something news. And they were farmers. But obviously, the country became more industrialized and people moved away from the farms. We do have farmers, but just like everything else, farming's become so sophisticated as well. So,
Hmm.
perhaps what they relied on the farmer's almanac for, now they get it on their phones, they get it on their computers and their tractors. So while I do think that there are farmers who still consult us or still get the almanac and read it for the other information, I think that more of our readers are actually from the suburbs or from, they have their own little gardens or that actually live in the cities too. We have a lot of people from Texas too, especially on our website at farmersalmanac.com. So I still think there's a lot of people that are from rural areas that do consult the Farmers Almanac, but I wouldn't say it's just for farming. I hope that the farmers still find it useful, and I do believe they do, but I think we've expanded our reach as well.
As you mentioned before, I do not think nostalgia should be underestimated in any way, shape, or form. And the nostalgia of this thing is very high level. I'm trying to think what's higher. It's like it's like you said, it's kind of the Bible and the Farmer's Almanac, these sort of ancient publications that have a lot of meaning for so many of us, especially if you are looking to find some reconnection or connection with Earth and Mother Nature. So this year's theme, as you said, was the wet winter whirlwind, which I love, the alliteration there. Was building this year's prediction different from other years? And maybe not, because you're saying it's built so far in advance. And do you look at how your winter prediction holds up and how this year's held up against what actually happened? Or is there a date you do that? You maybe wait till, I don't know, maybe a little bit later in the springtime.
Sure. Well, I think the first question is putting the weather predictions together for probably the past 5 years, especially. Climate is changing.
Hmm.
Things that we used to see are not happening anymore. So we're really trying to take this formula that is tried and true, but to continue to look at how the earth is changing and how the climate is changing. So it's been an interesting couple years, and we'll continue to fine tune it. And yeah, we obviously look at the winter weather forecast very carefully. So in each edition of the Almanac, we do give kind of a look back at how we did with the winter weather. We have not done that just yet because it's getting ready. Many of our forecasts were spot on. We're pretty proud of the wet winter whirlwind. I want to go to specifics, like I mentioned, farmersalmanac.com, we have a weather history tool. So you could compare a snowstorm that maybe you remember and remember well, and see what our outlook was to see how accurate we were. But yeah, we do try to give kind of an overview. And we do tell people that when we didn't hit it quite as accurate as we thought. I mean, even La Nina didn't form as much as we thought and as much as Noah thought. And a lot of
No.
people thought it was going to happen. It kind of fizzled out. It wasn't as big as we thought. So we will include some type of weather review in the next edition of the Almanac, as well as online at farmersalmanac.com.
Well, here's a rambling question. See if you can figure out. But you just spurred a lot of questions for me. So, climate change is changing our climate so fast. And you mentioned that that's made historical data maybe not as helpful as it used to be, right? Because it used to just be, and I don't know if our listeners know this, and this is a new understanding for me. So, when the National Weather Service gives you 30% chance of rain tomorrow, what they're doing is they're going back into their historical data, and basically what the models are showing might happen, they correlate that to how that looked in the past. So when the models looked like this, that meant 30% of the time that sort of a model ended up being actual rain on the ground. So they use the historical data, but the historical data is becoming less and less useful as climate change dramatically changes. Some people like to say instead of global climate change, maybe just or global warming, say global weirding, because it's just getting weird. So that historical data is not very accurate anymore. So you can imagine when your model lines up with historical data to say tomorrow's going to be a 30% chance of rain, but now your historical data is not very useful anymore because the climate has changed so much since then. Is it really going to be a 30% chance of rain? The answer is definitively no, because we can't rely on that historical data anymore. So again, this is a terrible rambling question. I guess, and so if you were in the same position, which you are as Noah, and you can't really rely on the historical data and you're seeing all this climate change, I guess maybe just speak a little bit to the historical data and a little bit to climate change and how you folks make your predictions.
Sure. So yeah, the weather forecast made by the Farmers Almanac, as I mentioned, is a proprietary formula. And historical weather does count to some play, but we really look almost, it's called, and I'm going to mess up the word, but I'm going to try it, astrometeorology. So
Hmm.
we're really looking at where the moon is in the zodiac, what phase the moon is in. We are looking at sunspot activity. I can't speak for our weather forecaster because, again, I'm not the one that does the weather forecasting. So he will be the one that tells us exactly how we fine tune certain things. But I think he may be dependent on that a little bit more and maybe some proprietary factors that I don't even know about because we really try our best. And yeah, the weather is becoming very, like you mentioned, weird, very, very weird. So we're hoping and doing our best to, that's why we're kind of excited that I think the winter whirlwind, I mean, the wet whirlwind was quite accurate because it was a whirlwind and it was a lot more wet than we, especially in my home state of the Farmers Almanac's home state of Maine. It was quite wet and white. So that was good.
Yeah, no, terrific. Obviously, anything, I mean, above average precip, I don't think is unappreciated anywhere anymore. And sort of an obvious yes, I think, to this question. But at the end of the winter, when you do look back and see, hey, how accurate were we with this? Do you make notes, learn, adjust your future forecasting strategies with that information?
Again, I don't do the forecast itself, so I'm not
Mhm.
sure exactly what his process is, but I
Mhm.
would think he does because again, we want to stay current. So in order to stay current, we got to look at everything that goes into play with the weather as well as our weather formula and then continue to do our best to give people an idea of what's to come in 16 months down the road.
And so since 1818, have you always had this long range winter prediction?
Yes, they've always had it.
Really?
If you look at older copies, in fact, it wasn't until 1995 edition when I took over as managing editor that we came up with zones. Before it was smaller, it was like a paragraph and it gave
Mhm.
the whole country kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
So it was a little bit less specific and a little bit more anecdotal kind of thing. But yeah, there was always weather forecast, there was always astronomy, there was always, you look back and some of the older almanacs also had the going rate of cattle or farming.
No, I love
Yeah,
that.
because it was
That's
a farming
important.
publication, so it is kind of fun. And we used to always like to say too, with our 200th edition, we reran some older articles or hints or tips from older editions of the Farmers Almanac, quite fun. And one of the one I found was so funny. It said, to tell if someone's passed away, put a mirror in front of their mouth and see if there's any breath. And I just thought that was so funny. Really?
That's insane.
You can't tell their pulse or kind of thing. But then there was other ones that talked about how cigarettes were really unhealthy. And this was back in 1800s. And I'm like, wow, they knew it back.
Whoa.
Or how to stay away from sugars and fats in a 1905 Farmer's Almanac. And it's like, okay, people, we've known this for a long time, but yet we don't pay attention. But it's kind of fun. And it is. And sometimes the older editions of the almanacs are kind of not very helpful. There's a recipe and it says, add a bunch of lard. There's no actual measurements of it kind of thing. But it's fun because it's a look back at what was important or what was of interest and what was of reference to people, 100, 150, 200 years ago.
Well, I would say you folks were ahead of your time with the smoking cigarettes and, or sorry,
I
smoking
know.
sugar and
I was
fats. Like,
amazed, right?
yeah, because that was doctors were, medical doctors were advertising
Right,
smoking
right.
cigarettes in the 60s. You
Crazy.
guys are in the 1800s on top of that. And then sugars and fats. I mean, that's like in the last couple of decades, people
I
figuring that
know.
out. I'm very impressed. All right. That perked up my ears a lot. And then so I do love that you've been doing this for 200 years. How would you rate its accuracy over the years? Have there been highs and lows, or is it consistently getting better? Or do you see any trends?
Sure. So it's really hard. People that follow our forecasts always say we're about 80 to 85% accurate. Some years
Wow.
I say we're as low as 75, 70. But
Still good numbers.
we
I mean,
can't we
anything
can't
over 50-50, right, is good.
exactly. We can't really keep track because we do the whole country. We also offer some weather forecasts for Canada. I would need a huge staff to try to keep track of everything. So we do try to
Yeah.
keep what as far as what happened with temperatures, what happened with snow, and when we hit a big snowstorm or something, we obviously keep track of that as well.
And how many people work for you? Mentioning your staff.
So that was going to be a question that you said, what was very interesting about our staff? There's only 5 of us full-time work
Oh,
on the.
wow. Okay. Awesome. Well, that's cool because that's the same as SnowBrains. We're
Yeah,
only
yeah.
five full-time people. Wow. All right. Touche. I love having a small team. It's very familial. We're definitely a family, and I bet you guys have a similar thing. Even though some of us have never even met before, we just have this terrific vibe, and we all know why we're here and why we love doing this. So I bet you guys have that similar vibe
Well,
here.
and that's what it is. It's all of us truly believe so much in the brand and love it. And we have people that have beautiful gardens. We have people that have lake places and love astronomy. We have a content editor on farmersalmanac.com, Mike Fury, who has some great contacts with both astrologers and astronomers. And he's been able to bring a lot of good information to farmersalmanac.com for people that want to know what's going on. I think the big thing with social media is before people liked astronomy, but some people could point out where the Big Dipper was or the Milky Way kind of thing. And
Mhm.
but now on Facebook or on social media or Instagram, people are sharing this picture of this some other thing. And they want to know what it is. Was it a meteor shower? And if so, when can I see it again? Or when is that next eclipse? I mean, last year was the big solar eclipse. So when is it going to happen? This year there was the red moon eclipse back in March. So we always have that information in the Farmer's Almanac and Wells Online. So
And again, people love that stuff. Sometimes in that love-hate vibe, we get this on SnowBrains as well. Do you ever receive feedback or criticism about your forecast, and how do you folks handle it?
of
Yeah,
course.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, yeah, there's people that complain about it. We're wrong. But for everyone that complains, we usually see somebody who's like, well, I don't know, they're spot on for us. So I think that just goes with the nature of the business, with any business, but especially with weather forecasting. You're obviously just like your meteorologist, your local meteorologist, people that love you and then people that hate you kind of thing. But again, Mother Nature's in charge. So yeah, we roll with the punches. We try to point out, we try to, like I said, we try to admit when we were slightly off and maybe why we were slightly off. So we do our best, and yeah, we take the punches and we roll with them while we can.
Well, and if your accuracy is around 80 to 85%, I don't think you have anything to balk about. Just the boldness to publish an in-print, unredactable winter prediction every single year. I think that shows a lot of guts. And I love people who have that kind of confidence. So I think that a lot of skiers and riders actually rely on your forecast, think about and use I know they do to plan their trips because they might look like, oh man, the Northwest saying cold and snowy this year. Maybe this is the year we go to Washington or Oregon for a trip. I've never been to Mount Hood, and so how do you folks feel knowing that your work impacts their adventures?
Excited and kind of nervous at the same time because obviously it's the weather. But yeah, I mean, that's the one thing about the Farmers Almanac. People do use it to plan ahead, whether there's a skiing trip or whether there's a wedding coming up or whether
Mm.
there's a family reunion coming up. Or some people even use it to budget their heating bills. It was going to be really cold. Ooh, we better stock
Oh.
up on firewood or we better, get our oil budget ready to go. So yeah, there's a lot of responsibilities. And like I said, I wish we were 100% accurate because then we would probably have a staff of 5,000 and we'd be so much more happier with everything that we do, but we can't nature. So yeah, it's a lot of responsibilities and we do love trying to give people an idea of what the weather may bring, but it is a little anxiety ridden as well because we're not always accurate, but we do our best. We really
Well,
do.
thank you for that very humanistic and honest answer. You already tapped into the answer of my next question is beyond winter sports, what other industries and activities depend heavily on your seasonal predictions?
That and gardening. Gardening is very popular. Now, it's funny, the print edition of the Farmers Almanac, as well as our winter outlook, comes out on farmersalmanac.com in August. And it's very popular. And then, of course, as we get closer to the first day of winter, as well as the end of the year, people think about the Farmers Almanac because it is always kind of like a calendar because it has so many calendars within its pages, as well as valuable information, stories and tips and recipes. But then come February, March, people want to know about the spring too, even if they're going
Hmm.
to go spring skiing. But what about their gardening information or when going fishing again? A lot of people use it to plan their gardens, and we even see it on our website. The traffic continues to go up in March again. March and April is quite a popular time for Farmers Almanac because of the gardening by the moon and the fishing calendar.
That really piqued my curiosity about saying the traffic goes back up in March. When are your highest traffic times? Is it the late summer, fall when you get the winter prediction out, and then again in the springtime, or are there other times?
I would say on farmersonly.com, it's August, September, and then November, December are pretty high, and then March. March traditionally has been a very regular time for people to access farmersalmanac.com because they want to know what we're predicting for the spring, but they really start looking at the gardening information. Gardening becomes quite popular. And then it's funny, become June, it starts to level off, but in a way, no, I always want you all to check out farmersalmanac.com, please, please, please. But
Hmm.
people are outside. They're
That's
outside.
true.
It's interesting, but then it peaks back up in August when we start to release the winter weather and the new edition as well.
So if you had to guess, and maybe you have better demographics than I imagine, who are the people? How do you box these people in? Gardeners, skiers. Who do you think is your biggest audience?
That's a really good question. And it's something that we're trying to get our arms around because, as I mentioned, we have a print publication, which, a lot of people are like, oh, print is dead, or that, people don't buy it. But we're sold as a magazine, but we're more than a magazine. Magazines usually come out once a week or once a month. And here's a quote unquote magazine with the Farmer's Almanac that is useful for the entire year. So I think sometimes we're sold as a magazine, looked at as a magazine, and lumped into that whole thing, but we're not. So we have that, and we have the readers over there, which traditionally used to skew a little bit older, maybe 55 and above or 45 and above. But we've seen a renewed interest in the Farmer's Almanac with younger generations. As I mentioned, There are young parents that actually use the Farmers Almanac to find the best days to potty train. And we've seen stuff on social media that people swear when they follow our best days to potty train, they get the best results possible. There's also, like I mentioned, ever since the pandemic, it seems to be a growing trend for people that want to grow their own food. When do you plant that tomato seed? When do you harvest it? How do you be careful of the last frost and that kind of stuff? And then our website, obviously we attract similar reader, but it tends to skew a little younger, probably more like 35 to 50 is probably the average age. And so it's interesting. Then we have a promotional version that's sold to other businesses. And a lot of times that one tends to be a little more traditional, a little more older skewed. But then we see a lot of newer business like real estate agencies, organizations giving it away as a, thanks for doing business or something like that. So it's very interesting. It's a kind of something, one of our goals is to get a little better handle on who actually is our reader. But I think it's kind of like our content. There's so much of it too, that it's kind of hard to put one person in a box per se and say you're an almanac reader.
It does make sense too that somebody who is interested in growing their own food or getting into gardening, it seems like a really good starting point for learning more about your natural world, because where you do want to start was with the fundamentals. And it does seem like the almanac is going to give you fundamentals, simple things like moon cycles, seasonality, and obviously when does the sun rise, when does it set? Those things are extremely important when it comes to learning the natural world, especially if you want to get your hands into gardening. And I'm sure you have guesses, but it does seem like, especially if you're getting that big spike in March, gardeners probably are a huge part of that. And I wonder, I don't have my AI chatbot open right now, but I bet if you asked AI, there'd be a lot of people identify as gardeners. So it does seem like a good and worthwhile audience to go after. So I guess sort of the final question line is, how do you see the Farmers Almanac evolving in the future? Are there new directions or innovations on the horizon?
I think, as I mentioned, the Farmers Almanac is going to continue to expand digitally. We do, as I mentioned, we have a membership on our website at farmersalmanac.com that offers, you can get more of the dated information that you can get in each print edition of the almanac. So you can see all the weather for the entire year when you sign up, or you can see all the astronomical information for the entire year or the gardening by the moon. So we plan on expanding that, perhaps forming some partnerships with like brands and having more information so that we are the source for so much valuable information. You want to become a member. In print, I think we're going to continue to fine tune our offerings and continue to make sure that we have information that's current and interesting in this day and age of AI, in this day and age of digital everything, in this day and age where you take your phone everywhere and you can pretty much get an answer, but yet you can't keep that in the rain. Well, you can't keep the almanac in the rain. But anyway, yes, we're going to continue to make sure that we also give you information like, okay, so it's a supermoon, but what does that mean to you? How do you use that? Or, there's going to be a meteor shower, but what does that mean? How do you use that? So I think we're going to continue to see, obviously, the weather and gardening and fishing, but I think we're going to continue to hone in on astronomy and what it means to you and how you can live a little bit more natural life, even if you live in a big city or even if you live in the city. I think there's going to be some changes coming up, and we continue to walk that line, as I mentioned, of being current and interesting as well as being nostalgic.
Well, I appreciate you telling me all of that. And I think that you should take to heart when I say that interpolating that data, like what does a supermoon mean for you? I think that has a huge amount of value because I can't tell you the amount of times I've been on a chairlift and had somebody say something like, the moss is extra thick on the tree, and last week's supermoon means this. And people love to talk about that, even if they don't wholeheartedly believe in it. They like to talk about it. It's fun to talk about it, see how other people react to it, hear their opinion. It starts a conversation, and that might be the most important thing, is just connecting with your fellow humans on a natural level. Whether that's perfectly accurate or not is important as the former things that we were speaking of. So I think that it's really exciting. I think what you folks do is terrific. I'm excited to see what your next winter forecast is, your next winter prediction is. And for any skiers and riders, definitely go to farmersalmanac.com because you'll definitely find something to interest you. And if nothing else, start with this year's the 2025 winter prediction and see how it correlated to your area. How accurate was it? How off was it? And then that might just start you down the rabbit hole. And then we're all definitely excited for late August when the next prediction comes out. So, Sandi, I think that's all I got for you. Do you have anything else you'd like to share here at the end of the show?
No, but I think I may have come up with it. The question you asked about what's something you don't know about working with the Farmers Almanac,
Uh-huh.
there is one thing. In addition to being editor, my title is also falam. Do you know what a falam is?
I don't know what a falam is.
A falam is a lover of learning. It's actually an abbreviation for a Greek word is philomath. And when Ben Franklin had an almanac, Farmers Almanac, way back when, he used the title. And then our founding editor used the title, as well as the editor emeritus. And I got the title probably about 15 years ago. So yes, if you work on the almanac long enough, you too could become a falam, a lover of learning.
In a philam math, I mean, my lousy Latin serves me. Phila is love, and math is probably mathematics. So it's like you love math and science and that kind of stuff. So I do love the basis of those old words. Did you say Ben Franklin?
Yes.
And how was he related to the almanac?
He actually had an almanac for quite some time.
A
It
farmer's
was
almanac.
called the Poor Richard's Almanac he put out.
Okay.
And in fact, there's an interesting scandal slash story that goes along with it. At the time, there was another almanac. I can't recall off the top of my head what it was called, being published at the same time. And he wanted all the readers to read his almanac. So in his almanac, he said that this guy had actually passed away and that it was somebody that was not really truly this guy. So you shouldn't believe anything he says. And in fact, the poor guy was still alive. So it's very quite interesting. In fact, that's where the almanacs actually got some of their folksy appeal. Like each edition of the almanac, we have what we call philosophacs. They're kind of like words of wisdoms or thoughts of the day, but it's a little bit of philosophy and a little bit of wisdom. And that kind of dates back to Ben Franklin, because obviously he's well known for his little sayings, and he pretty much used his almanac to create these sayings and to share them and publish them. And it was one of the most famous almanacs besides ours, but the Poor Richard's Almanac.
Poor Richard's Almanac. I love it. So Benjamin Franklin, one of our founding fathers, not only highly intelligent and super useful in the founding of this amazing country, but also ruthless and conniving. I love it. As you have to be to make it to the top, right? So,
Right.
well, thank you so much for sharing those last anecdotes, especially Benjamin Franklin, because I think we're all a little infatuated with him as a founding father type of person. Well, thank you so much, Sandy. I really appreciate your
Thank
time
you.
and energy. So, thank you
All
so
right.
much for coming on the show. Have a terrific rest of the day. And I definitely want to stay in touch with you. And I'm very excited about the next winter prediction.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the SnowBrains podcast. If you like this podcast, please share with friends and family, and please make sure to subscribe. To find out more about SnowBrains, please visit us at snowbrains.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and more. This episode of the SnowBrains podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Ditch the hassle and embrace the freedom of an all-inclusive ski vacation with Club Med. Their resorts in the European Alps and Canada offer the perfect blend of exhilarating skiing, exceptional service, and worry-free pampering. Enjoy having lift tickets, delicious meals, lessons for all ages, and endless apres-ski fun, all included in one price. While the kids are having a blast at the supervised children's clubs, you can focus on mastering your skiing skills and creating unforgettable memories on and off the slopes. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to experience skiing without limits. This episode of the SnowBrains podcast was edited by Liam Abbott. Music by Chad Crouch. And I'm your host, creator, and director, Miles Clark.